Hey guys, this is Chris Hernandez from Houston Combat Photography, and I wanted to talk to you today about one of my favorite cameras in the whole world, definitely my favorite twin lens reflex camera, the Voigtlander Superb. This is just an incredible camera. So real quick, I'm going to give you the history of why twin lens reflex cameras were created. So back 1910s, 1920s, these were the type of cameras that people commonly use. This is a Voigtlander, I don't even know what it is, an Avis or something. It's been modified a little bit. But basically you had this camera that you look through your ground glass back here to compose and focus. You might have a sports finder, speed finder, prism view or something like that to help. But once you compose your image, you had to remove your ground glass and then put a film holder back here and take an individual picture. So that was a time-consuming process. You really couldn't do a lot of moving around, or it was more difficult to do moving around. You could do it if you really knew what you were doing. And so in the late 1920s, a couple of guys who, I understand, they were working for Voigtlander, they came up with the idea to make a twin lens reflex camera. Their last names were Franke and Heidecke. And they thought, well, what if we had a camera with two lenses, and one of them, the viewing lens, here's an early Rolleiflex, not the earliest, but here's an early Rolleiflex. The top lens, the viewing lens, you can always look through. So if your subject moves, if something changes, you always see what the camera sees. The bottom lens is the taking lens. That's the one that actually takes a picture. But this one you can look through all the time, just from looking through the top of the camera. It was a revolutionary idea. They approached Voigtlander with it. Voigtlander said no, and so they went off on their own, created the Rolleiflex, and it was wildly successful. So after that happened, Voigtlander decided, hey, we need to get in on this, and they came up with this, made another camera, a little cheaper, less capable, called the Brilliant, but this was their primary competitor to the Rolleiflex, the Voigtlander Superb. So this particular one is a later model. I don't think they were made past around 1939. They first came out in the early 30s. And I don't know why they were not incredibly commercially successful. So there are not nearly as many of these as there are Rolleiflexes. Okay, so let me tell you how you operate this. Okay, first of all, film loading. So if you are familiar with the Rolleiflex, you know that basically every Rolleiflex opens up some, down here at the bottom, there's some mechanism to open it up. You put your film in down here and it feeds vertically, vertical film transport. The Voigtlander Superb, I'm told, in order to, one of the things they did to avoid patent infringements is they have a different method. They have like clamshell doors. You have this little clip that holds this hinged first door here and then second door here. And here's where your, here's your film transport, okay, your film plane. So to load film, you pull this knob out right here, twist it, that'll stay open, put this in there, twist the knob again and close it, pull your film around, feed it into your take-up spool on this side, and here you've got a film advance lever. You turn it some till you have your slot on your spool, feed it into your spool, start turning your crank, and of course something just went wrong and it is not, I'm not set in there right. Come on, baby, get in there, get in there. There it goes, okay. And you just feed it in there until it's tightened up, starts taking up the backing paper. Okay, on a Rolleiflex, you have to worry about getting an arrow in the exact right spot so that the film counter is set the right way. This one you don't really have to. As soon as it's tightened up, you can close it. Close it up, and over here, you've got a little red window. You turn this little diamond-shaped thing, turn it, and now you can see the white backing paper. And you just advance your film lever until you get to where you see 1. Okay, sometimes it's kind of hard to see. You might have to see that in bright light, or you might have to look through that in bright light to spot it. If you forget to close this thing, I've forgotten it before, it hasn't made any difference. Granted, I was shooting in a semi-dark room. You might have different results in sunlight. But anyway, once you get to 1, let's say we're at 1, you just close this. And here's your film counter back here. Now, of course, because you were just cranking, advancing the film, it's not gonna be at 1. It will have advanced. So now you've got this thing here. It's a little bitty thing sticking up that you just hook your fingernail in and you pull it toward the front of the camera. You do it enough, and that film counter will eventually move back to 1. Okay, this is hard to do for a reason, so you don't accidentally hit it while you're using it and reset your film counter. So now you're at 1. So just like any other twin lens reflex camera, you look through here to compose your image. Here's your focus ring down here. It is fairly easy to move. Compose your image. If you need a magnifier, if you're an old guy like me and your near vision sucks, you've got a magnifier in there. Compose your image, set your f-stop right here. Set your shutter speed here, this ring right there. Cock your shutter, take the picture. There's your film release, okay? Your shutter release, I'm sorry. I advise as soon as you take the picture, start advancing, cranking to the next frame. It takes, when you first take your first picture, it takes about 6 cranks to advance to the next frame. As you take more pictures and more film is gathered up around the take-up spool, it's going to be less. So by the end of it, you're down to like 5 cranks, and in the middle about 5.5. Okay, so a couple of interesting features about this camera. If you look down from the top, you can see all of your numbers. You can see what distance you're focused at. You can see your f-stop, and you can see what your shutter speed is. Now, if you look closely on the dial, on the shutter speed dial, you'll notice the numbers are backwards, and that's because as you're looking down, there's this little prism right here, this little mirrored prism. That's where you see your shutter speed flipped around the right way. So it's a really cool design. Something that is just incredibly cool about these cameras, an inherent problem with twin lens reflex cameras is parallax. Okay, you have 2 lenses. Ideally or theoretically, what you're seeing looking through your viewing lens is exactly what you see, or what your taking lens sees. Unfortunately, because they're offset, it's not. There's a difference. So it doesn't make that much of a difference as you're farther away, but when you get in close, your camera is going to see, your 2 lenses are going to see something slightly different. My understanding is that Rolleiflex really didn't take it into account. As a photographer, you just have to be aware. In the Mamiya C330, a more modern twin lens reflex camera, there's a red line at the top of the ground glass, and the closer you get, that line starts coming down from the top, and that shows you, hey, you're going to cut off the top of the image if you don't take this into account, if you don't adjust. What Voigtlander did, if you look up close here, look at the viewing lens. Right now I'm out to infinity. I'm focused to infinity. But as I come in closer, you see the viewing lens actually starts angling downward. That is to compensate for parallax, so that what the viewing lens and the taking lens see is much closer. It's a really cool thing that Voigtlander put in their cameras. It actually came from, or at least was used before that, in an early 1930s camera, the Voigtlander Virtus. This is a beautiful example that was brought back from Germany by a soldier in World War II. This is a zone focus camera. When you look through it to compose your image, it's not focusing. You have to know your distance and you have to dial that in. But the viewfinder, as you're getting in closer, internally this viewfinder is tilting downward to try to eliminate parallax. So it's the same idea. Voigtlander has had some brilliant engineers, and they came up with that solution. Another really cool thing about this camera is that inside that little white dot up there, that is a spirit level. So you can make sure that you're holding your camera level as you're looking down and taking the picture. Another cool thing, that this has a sports finder, just like the Rolleiflex. Say you're going to do hyperfocal distance focusing, meaning you're going to take some action shots, you're going to take some sports shots, something like that. Then you cannot focus on every shot as people are running around, right? what you do is you refer to your depth of field chart, okay, or you can use an app like I've got called Digital DOF, Digital Depth of Field. And if you put in a 6x6 medium format film, this is a 75 millimeter lens. If you set this lens at f/16 and you set your focus to 22 feet, then everything from roughly 12.5 feet to infinity is in focus. Now you just have to take into account your lighting conditions. If you're outside shooting in bright sunlight, you can shoot at 250, whatever your fastest is. And your shots, basically your camera is pre-focused and everything should be more or less in focus as long as your subjects are at least 12.5 feet away. So to use the sports finder, you just push this down, and now on the back, you've got this peep sight, and here's the window that you use to frame your image, to compose. Remember, you're pre-focused, you're just using this to compose your image. And back here, as you are, if you're shooting far, if you're shooting up close, you can adjust this to take into account the parallax, okay? Again, this is a really awesome system, just a beautiful, well thought out camera. Okay, so, something else I was gonna explain. This camera has the HeliR lens. These came with the HeliR, more expensive, more capable lens, and the Scope R lens, which was more affordable. I bought this camera for $100 at an antique shop. The guy was just, I think he'd been selling for $300 before, but he hadn't sold anything for a while, so he's like, here, I'll give this to you for $100. I had never seen one before, didn't know anything about them. After I bought it, a friend of mine looked at it and said, holy cow, it's got the HeliR lens. That's worth a lot. I look it up, and these things can sell for like in the $800 range. So I totally lucked out on this camera. But this has the outstanding HeliR lens. So I'm going to show you some example photos I've taken with this. So these took them a couple weekends ago here in my house, in my home studio room, in the library my wife set up downstairs. And you'll notice they're beautiful pictures. They, I have adjusted some for contrast. In a couple of these pictures, like this one, I was slightly off focus. Again, that's not the fault of the camera. That's my old eyes being 53. My near vision is shot. I'm wearing bifocals, and even sometimes using the magnifier, I have trouble getting precise focus. But the camera focuses beautifully. And to show you an example of how good the camera is, here's the last picture I took. I have not adjusted this at all for sharpness. The only thing I did was adjust contrast and tones. It takes a very sharp image. It has got that beautiful, I think this is an uncoated lens, got that beautiful vintage look that you get from these old cameras. As far as I can tell so far, you really cannot replicate this kind of look digitally. It looks artificial. So, beautiful camera, wonderful to use. I enjoy shooting with this more than I enjoy shooting with the Rolleiflex. But it does have a couple of drawbacks to it. So what would the drawbacks be? Well, the ground glass is pretty dark. I don't know if it's because of this camera, that's just how they were made. My old Rolleiflex, the ground glass, and this one is also pretty dark. Probably just because it's 90-ish years old. But it's, more difficult to use this than to use a modern twin lens like my Rolleiflex 2.8D or my Mamiya C330. Also, film advance is a little slower because you're doing this for every frame, okay? And you have to watch the back of the frame. You have to watch the film counter to make sure you don't advance too far, that you haven't advanced enough, okay? So you do have to slow down a little bit more with this camera than with the Rolleiflex, which you crank it and it automatically stops the next frame. But you're shooting film. You're already shooting slow. Shooting a little bit slower should not bother you all that much. Something to keep in mind if you do buy one of these and you plan on putting it on a tripod, maybe using a cable shutter release, which is a really good idea, that the tripod socket is the European, I think it's a 3/8 of an inch, versus the American 1/4 inch. This one already had an adapter screwed into it to make it a 1/4 inch. So it's just something to be aware of. If you don't do that, you buy this thing, you say, oh great, I'm going to put it on a tripod. Your tripod may not fit. Okay. But anyway, again, this is the beautiful, wonderful Voigtlander Superb twin lens reflex cameras. I personally think it is one of the best twin lens reflex cameras, if not the best ever made. It's an absolute joy to use it. And every time I use one of these old cameras, the old Rolleiflexes, the Voigtlander Vertus I show you, various other, I'm just constantly in awe of the genius of those engineers who created those cameras back in the old days. So if you have any questions about this camera, please ask in the comments. If I've gotten something wrong and you need to correct me, please put it in the comments. Let us all know. I am happy to learn more. As I've said before, I'm an eternal amateur. I'm always learning. Guys, please take your old cameras, dust them off, and go out and take some cool pictures. So until next time, I'm Chris Hernandez from Houston Combat Photography. See y'all later.